says. So there are many other versions of this hadith. This is from Sahih Muslim 2922. Abu Huraira reported Allah's Messenger Muhammad as saying, "The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, 'Muslim or the servant of the slave of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.' But the tree Garkad would not say, for it is the tree of the Jews." Okay, so Islam is genocidal to Jews, correct? Okay. Now we're going to learn the story of Purim, the history of Purim from Queen Esther. Moving on, Esther chapter 7, verse 10 through 10. So the king and Haman who is an Agagite from the lineage of Agag the Amalekites. Keep this all in perspective. The Amalekites want to exterminate the Jews because they know that they will be exterminated by the hand of God in Armageddon. So they think if they can destroy Judaism that they win. So the king and Haman the Agagite, the Macedonian, in the Greek Esther chapters. They came to a banquet with Esther the queen, and the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted you. What is your request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom." Then Esther the queen answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish by the hand of Haman the Agagite." He wanted to exterminate every single Jew in the land of the Persians. He wanted to completely exterminate them. Well, doesn't that not sound like what the Muslims want? What their prophet said? "For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage." Then King Xerxes answered and said unto Esther the queen, "Who is he and where is he that dares to presume in his heart to do so?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman the Agagite, from the lineage of the Amalekites. Agag is the name of the king of Amalek." Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, so let's keep this in perspective. These were not the Persians who wanted to exterminate the Jews. These were foreigners. These were Amalekites within the kingdom. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Queen Esther was. Then said the king, "Will he force the queen also before me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, it covered Haman's face. So the king saw what looked like Haman about to rape Esther, and that was it. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, "Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high," which is about 75 feet high, "which Haman had made for Mordecai." Mordecai being the uncle of Esther. The tombs of Esther and Mordecai were firebombed in Iran in recent weeks. I believe it was during Purim this happened. So we can see Iran is completely controlled by the Amalekites. Everywhere there is severe repression of people and severe corruption, these are civilizations controlled by the Amalekites. So Palestine, Iran, and many others. Especially if they hate Jews. If they have a pathological hatred for Jews to the extent that they want to exterminate them, you better believe Amalek is there. Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. On that day did the king Xerxes give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So this is actually historically accurate. You can find Mordecai in the records of King Xerxes. He was in the court of King Xerxes. However, the Macedonian Empire tried to destroy all the evidence of the Jews in Persia, in Babylon as well. So there's that to contend with. There's been a massive cover-up. The Bible's true. Everyone who's fighting against the Bible is from Amalek. Okay, whether they know it or not, if you are actively destroying history to undermine accuracy of the Bible, to undermine faith in the Bible, you are Amalek, which is Islam. Islam is very hostile to the Bible. It doesn't matter how much evidence for the Bible there is, the Muslims will never accept it. Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. What was this device? On a certain day, they were going to be exterminated. All the Jews in the Persian Empire were going to be wiped out because Haman had convinced the king that they were hostile and dangerous and could not be trusted. And yes, there are wicked Jews, but these are heretics to Judaism. These are heretics to the law of Moses. These are heretics to the prophets. These are heretics to Jesus, who is their king. But when you actually follow what the Bible teaches, when you understand logically what Moses was talking about, what the prophets were talking about, what Jesus was talking about, it's one consistent religion from the very beginning up until the cross. So Jesus is affirmation for the Bible. It's all one story. It's all very much synchronized. So they hang Haman. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther, so Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Xerxes said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write you also for the Jews as it likes you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants and the deputies and rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia. 127 provinces, and every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after the language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Xerxes' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish. This is how we deal with the enemy of Zion. And we know who that enemy is because we know what they say. We know what they say about the Jews. We know what they say about the Christians. We know what their prophet did. This is how we deal with them. There's no reasoning with Satan. You fight the way God taught us to fight, and you win because God fights for you. Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Xerxes, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province, which was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. And this is in the history, but they covered it up very nicely. But Mordecai and Esther absolutely were involved with King Xerxes, the way this book says. But the Macedonian Empire covered it up. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, and the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants and the deputies, and the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai grew greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and Farshandatha and Dalphon and Aspatha and Poratha and Adalia and Aridatha and Parmashtha and Arisai and Aridai and Vajezda. The 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not their hand. On that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace. And the 10 sons of Haman What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition, and it shall be granted thee? Or what is thy request, and it shall be done? Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged from the gallows. And the king commanded it to be done, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. But they laid not their hands on the prey, meaning like the spoils of war. On the 13th day of the month Adar, on the 14th day of the same rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan gathered themselves together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far. Establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device which he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to all their writing, and according to their appointed time every year. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it is written in this book. And King Xerxes laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea. I believe this is talking about the Greek islands. And all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia, which the Macedonian Empire destroyed? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Xerxes, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. Amen and amen. Very important story, the book of Esther, very important. So, remember Purim, they're coming after us. We have every right. If they call for our extermination, we have every right to throw the first punch. Don't forget that, because they want to exterminate us. It's in their writings. But we will not win any conflict without the will of God. So we better obey. Christ is king. The Torah is the Constitution. Obey your king, and he will give us victory over our enemies. However it happens, it will happen in our favor. Satan will never defeat God, no matter how much trouble he causes, until his untimely defeat. So, obey Jesus. Keep the law of Moses until heaven and earth passes away. The Amalekites are after us, and they will lose, and they will be blotted out from under the sun, just as God promised Moses. God bless.